that any entity that's interested in applying for these vital public funds should be able to apply to them or for them. As we're seeing the impact right now on our kids, the kids that don't have access to broadband, and people are worrying about the long-term life impact of that, we're just really at an all hands on deck situation. So, and in fact, I don't really think the public would understand if anyone would be excluded from trying to at least apply for these funds. So I don't know if you know, but I think there are only like 27 broadband authorities in Virginia, if my count is correct. They're the salt of the earth. They were created out of local communities who didn't have access to broadband. And they actually go through a public authorization process in order to form. So, and they would be subject to the same financial, operational, and technical requirements as any of the private sector applicants. And they would also, it would also be DHCD who would pick the finalists, right? So that's my 2 cents. I just really encourage you guys to let anyone apply for those funds. And thanks again for your public service.
Thank you so much, Ms. Rice. Appreciate it.
Next up, we have Sherry Neal with the City of Portsmouth. Ms. Neal, you there?
I'm sorry, I had to turn my microphone on. Good afternoon, Commission members. Thank you so much for having, let me speak for a moment. Again, thank you for all of your hard work. And just to piggyback off of the last speaker, we do also support the ability of local municipalities that have broadband authorities to tap into the VATI money. As we have found from this pandemic, that it is no longer a luxury to have internet service, but it's actually a utility at this point, similar to water, electricity, or anything else that's necessary to, survive. And I'm looking at your recommendations to the chairs of the money committees, and I'm hoping that the committee will support B and C. Those are good options, and we really definitely support those. So we want to thank you for all your kind considerations.
Thank you so much, Ms. Neal. Appreciate it.
One person that hasn't signed up in the box was Pat Cody. Pat, are you there?
I am. I'm available. You want me to take time now? Okay. First, by way of introduction, my name is Patrick Cody. I'm speaking as a private citizen. I was the first executive director of the Eastern Shore of Virginia Broadband Authority. My background is as a serial entrepreneur. I've been involved with 10 startups in a rural county of upstate New York. In 1999, just as the dot-com meltdown began, I co-founded an all-fiber broadband network in upstate New York. In spite of the dot-com meltdown, we were able to take that to profitability. And in 2004, it was sold, which enabled me to retire to the Eastern Shore. From there, I went back to 19K dial-up from having direct fiber at home. I couldn't even support 56K dial-up because the phone lines are so bad. When I became aware of the Eastern Shore of Broadband initiative, I had already run the business model that we used in upstate New York for the Eastern Shore of Virginia, and determined that with a quarter of the population and a third the businesses, the numbers just didn't work. You couldn't get loans long enough and low enough on a startup, if you could get them at all. and you couldn't expect investors to wait that long for the return on investment. So I did not attempt to do on the Eastern Shore of Virginia what we'd done in upstate New York. But when I learned that the Broadband Authority had been formed and had garnered something on the order of $8 million in grants, I reran the numbers and said, yes, this works. If I have $8 million I do not have to pay back, then from there on in, the financials work. And so what I'd like the council to understand is that I have done an all fiber network. You know, obviously I didn't do them by myself, but I have led 2 all fiber networks, one public and one private. And they both have been successful. And the second one, the public one, is in 2 of the sparsest and poorest counties in the Commonwealth. It's not magic, it's good business planning. And so I strongly support any proposal that allows additional grant funds to help any entity, but particularly public entities, to roll out services to underserved and unserved areas. And as you'll see, if you've had an opportunity to read the papers I submitted, I very strongly feel that public-private ventures or private-only ventures that are not regulated utilities are not going to reach all. You will never get to universal coverage if you depend on a private entity to build out to those uneconomic areas. It's not in their best interest, and if they're public, it's not in their fiscal responsibility. And so if you want universal coverage to actually happen, you need to do it in a manner that guarantees that those people that are receiving the funds are committed to going everywhere. And I also say in my papers that I don't believe we can afford to grant our way to universal coverage. I think this council also needs to work on the other 2 items, which are best practices and long-term low-cost financing that will enable entities that are in business and are successful to more quickly build out the rest of their territories. And I'll be quiet and take any questions or comments.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Mr. Cody. I appreciate it. Does anybody have any questions?
Thank you for your time.
All right, Madam Chair, I do have one written in comment. If anyone else is interested in something, by all means, put your name in the comment box with your organization, and we'll get to you. The written in comment is from David Ludwig, a resident of Albemarle County. His comment regards the policy discussions later on down the agenda. So the comment is, I appreciate the opportunity to offer a public comment to this council as a resident of the Commonwealth representing a household with 2 young adults working from home and 2 children participating in online schooling these days while currently being served by an unreliable DSL connection. We certainly feel a need for improved internet accessibility very personally, and I appreciate everything the Broadband Advisory Council, DHCD, and our county's Broadband Authority are doing to try to address this issue. That said, when I learned about this meeting and saw the agenda included discussion about some possible legislative initiatives, I wanted to offer a commentary that, in my view, the Commonwealth would benefit from with respect to deploying telecommunications infrastructure to support expansion of broadband accessibility. Many other states and localities have implemented some form of a dig once approach where right-of-way owners, sometimes private entities such as a utility company and sometimes public ones such as state departments of transportation, are tasked with deploying some level of telecommunications infrastructure, often either conduit alone or conduit as well as dark fiber while they're already actively performing other work on their right-of-way. The Utah Department of Transportation spoke at a conference a few years ago, and I understand that their state has had great results in achieving broadband connectivity in some very rural and otherwise hard-to-service areas. in part by tasking UDOT with deploying conduit as well as fiber optic cabling anytime that they are performing earth-disturbing construction work within their public right-of-way. When the right-of-way owner is a public entity, my general understanding is that by allowing the state or locality the option to provide a middle-mile solution for broadband infrastructure, often in a partnership with a private ISP, to deliver, manage, and administer the final broadband service to the customer, this might have the added benefit of creating revenue-generating opportunities for the public entity, which might help fund or offset the public investments in expanding this critical service. I hope that Virginia will consider this and all other viable solutions to help address the broadband availability issue.
Thank you very much. The Dig Once is something that we've definitely been working on for a number of years. Are there any other comments or feedback from anybody? Okay. Shall we move on to the next part of our agenda then, the overview of options to recommend to the House Appropriations and Senate Finance and Appropriation Committee chairs, with Eric Johnston and Evan Feinman leading that.
Senator Boysko?
Yes, sir.
We are going to have to tackle the consent agenda and approval of minutes.
Well, you know what? I am reading. Excuse me.
I'm excited for the conversation too. Yeah.
Pardon me. I just jumped over it. Okay. Can we have a motion to approve the minutes from November 13th, 2020?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Okay.
Okay, we're going to need a roll call vote there. So Delegate Hurst.
Aye.
Delegate Krizik.
Aye.
Delegate Tyler.
Aye.
Senator Hashmi.
Aye.
Senator Boysko.
Aye.
Senator Lewis. Aye. I'm here. Jimmy Carr.
Aye.
Christy Proctor.
Aye.
Mike Kaiser. Mr. Kaiser. Come back
Aye.
to you. Ray Lemira.
Aye.
Gotcha. Ray
Aye.
Lemira.
Aye.
Steve Sandy.
Aye.
Michael Culp.
Aye.
Rich.
Aye. Schulman.
Gotcha. Secretary Ring.
Aye.
And Evan Feinman.
Aye.
And let's go back just to see Delegate Leftwich. Okay, with all members voting yes and one abstain, we're good to go on minutes, Madam Chair.
Okay, so I'm obviously eager to get the meeting going, it seems. If Eric Johnston and Evan Feinman could begin the conversation about the overview of the budget language recommendations and the options for what we have in front of us as far as taking action on how we proceed, I'd be delighted.
Sure. I think we have a PowerPoint. Chandler, do you have that? We may have lost Chandler. Well, in any event, the matter before the council is, oh, there we go. Coming up. There we go. Seeing it a little offset. Can everybody else see this properly or improperly?
It's improper looking to me, kind of.
Yes, same here.
Okay, let's pull that up. I think the next one will be fine, Chandler. Okay, there we go. So
How's that looking? Can I tell from my end?
That's just fine.
Okay.
We can make that work. Thank you. The matter before the council is the following directive. The Broadband Advisory Council shall assess updating the Virginia Telecommunication Initiative to allow for public broadband authorities to apply directly for VADI funds without investment from the private sector. The Department of Housing and Community Development, on behalf of the council, shall submit feedback on the potential impacts of this policy change to the chairs of House Appropriations and Senate Finance and Appropriations on or before the start of the 2021 General Assembly session. So that is to say, this council needs to come up with a recommendation for potential policy changes and determine what the impact of that will be and let the money committees know. So we at the staff level got together and came up with what we think are kind of three options, though of course the council is a body that may do what it will. The first option is essentially to recommend no change. So that's straightforward. It would say that there needs to be a public-private partnership. It is, of course, worth remembering that authorities that are already in partnership with a private ISP are currently eligible for VADI as the rules exist. The second option is that the Broadband Advisory Council may recommend a change to the budget to open up application to VADI without a requirement that there be a private sector investor or a private sector partner. That would be to say all public entities may apply and for support in construction of a network or a network expansion and receive VADI consideration in doing so. The third is a compromise measure, which would be to ask DHCD in the course of its regular updating of the VADI guidelines, which happen annually and include a pretty robust stakeholder process, that there be created a pilot not to exceed 10% of total available funds and permit public entities to apply to that pilot. So, really quickly broken down, it's don't change anything, keep it all public-private partnerships, open it up broadly to all public applicants and allow them to compete for the same pot of money as the public-private partnerships, or carve off a set of money and say, or at least cap a set of money and say, public entities may apply, but no more than 10%, or a different percentage if the council goes in a different direction, shall be expended on those pilot applications, which would be to say the public of applicants. Does that make sense to everybody?
Yeah, thank you. Are there specific questions from members of the council to start the conversation? Who want to? I know that I'll tell you. I would like it if Evan could talk a little bit about the history of why it has been a public-private partnership and what it would mean to the Commonwealth's long-term vision of expanding internet to people as we're making this decision. But I'm wondering if other people have a question that would like to go first.
Madam Chair?
Yes.
It's Chris.
Yes.
Hey, thank you, Madam Chair. Evan, can you just remind us again, because we do have people outside of the council who are participating by watching, where we stand right now for how much money we have to allocate versus how many grant applications we've seen for the total amount requested, just so that we have an understanding that we do have way more demand than we have of supply.
Certainly, Madam Chair, Delegate Hurst, the current program requires that there be both private sector investment in a proposed project and that all projects be a public-private partnership, which is to say a unit of local government or a consortium of groups of local governments, as well as a private sector ISP or a group of ISPs. Currently, in the current VADI round, The applications came in mid-August, and the legislature, thank you, members of the Virginia General Assembly and folks who advocated for this, the General Assembly allocated just under $50 million for this for consideration of applications in this round. So that's happening currently. And in pursuit of that $50 million, we received applications from dozens and dozens of communities around the Commonwealth, totaling requests for a little over $105 million. So the program is more than double subscribed at its current absolute high water mark. And it's worth noting, we've never come anywhere near 50 million. We, previously were at 19 and then 4 and then 1 within the body program. Now, it is worth noting that even if we had $105 million, I think staff would resist funding all 105 million of those requests. They're not all meritorious, but far more than 50 million are. We are going to be saying no to a large number of applicants this year who have good projects. They just aren't quite as good according to the metrics that the General Assembly and the stakeholder community believes we should be focused on. To more broadly frame the question, I think it's important to remember that this is a pretty narrow and very specific question. Should application to the Commonwealth's primary infrastructure constructing grant program be opened to localities and their authorities? That is a separate question from what is the proper place for municipally owned assets, municipally operated networks in the broader landscape of Virginia's broadband future. And so I think, to the extent we're talking about the applicability and usefulness of municipal networks, we should focus on VADI, which is a program that we've really purpose-built and refined. And, I think the team has done a really good job. If you look at our outputs from VADI, this is one of the best broadband infrastructure constructing programs in the nation. And we've built that by keeping laser focused on this is a program that is designed to efficiently and affordably build infrastructure to homes and businesses that do not currently have access to broadband infrastructure. VADI is not a vehicle for telehealth service provision. It's not a vehicle for solving the affordability problem. It's not a vehicle necessarily for solving the question of how do we get equipment and devices to students for their teleeducation needs. That's not to say those aren't good, laudable efforts and important challenges. It's just not what this specific program was purpose-built to do. And I want to make sure that we keep our focus on that issue for this portion of the meeting.
Thank you.
Madam Chair, if I may, a follow-up?
Yes, Mr. Hurst.
Thank you. Evan, 2 questions. The first is, if we did a pilot, normally when we do a pilot, we do it as a proof of concept, proof of performance. What would we be, in your mind, thinking of as objectives or outcomes that we would want to look at for a pilot program? Because I'm just not necessarily sure that, the outcome is that we want the infrastructure to be done. And certainly if there's a proposal that's vetted by VADI and is determined to be meritorious, then it's meritorious. What would be the point essentially of a pilot program aside from just making, a policy decision on competition and access for funds?
I think, Madam Chair, Delegate Hurst, I think the things that we could learn from a pilot program include, first, what is the efficiency from a public funding standpoint by which these projects could be achieved by local government entities rather than public-private partnerships. We have some pretty high capacity broadband authorities, and we have some that are, frankly, sort of nominal authorities, but not really engaged in any sort of realistic endeavor. The second question that I'd want to know is, frankly, who given a pretty long runway, it's December of 2020, we would be taking applications on effectively the same schedule. So it'd be late summer of 21. How many localities had the wherewithal to put together a strong application given a 9-month runway to the VADI program? I think that's an open question. Right now, if I had to guess, I think there are 4, probably maybe 5, that both have significant unserved populations adjacent to their existing networks and are able to, have the wherewithal to put together a VADI application. But we could be wrong. It may be that a set of communities would be very interested and would pursue it. So the number of applications we got to the pilot would be informative as well, because we'd know what the real capacity was across all of these different local authorities to figure out what their challenges are and apply to VADI for the solution. The last thing that I think we learned, though we wouldn't learn it within a year, would be whether or not, as has been argued, for lack of a better term, and this isn't perfectly applicable, but the moral hazard inherent in being a public authority would lead these networks to be operated in a fashion that wasn't focused on the bottom line, because there was an expectation that if they weren't able to bring in enough revenue to cover expenses, there'd be ongoing public subsidy. It would be worth knowing that. One of the advantages of our public-private partnership model is that the public doesn't bear any ongoing risk in terms of maintaining operations for these networks that are purchased. We make these one-time capital expenditures, and then the private sector continues to operate the network, whether or not that particular portion of the network is operating in the black or the red, because it's added to their overall network and it's just not considered that way. Those would be the things that I think we could learn from a pilot. It would be a departure from current practice, and so there's also some argument for prudence, right? That you don't just move aggressively in a new direction. You'd say, look, this is something new, so we're going to limit the amount of the pot that can be allocated to it in a given year. 10% is the number we came up with. It has the benefit of being round and modest, but we're not wedded to that specific figure.
Thank you. Other questions from the members of the council?
Madam Chair, can you hear me?
Yes, Delegate.
This is Jay Leftwich. So my initial question is, Evan or whoever may be able to answer it, is, as you read over the proposal and the 3 options, it states that local governments would be able to participate. And as we know from the Roanoke Valley Broadband Authority, it's an authority. So when we say local government, do we mean the local government proper, or do we mean a local subdivision of a local government?
As I reread the directive, the specific question on slide 2 regarded authorities. And so, I think that specific question will need to be addressed, Delegate, but the council can make what recommendations it will, right? So we can approach the problem in whatever fashion people want. And so, I think saying local governments or a unit of local government is appropriate. By and large, that's going to mean authorities, to be clear. But I don't know that we have a preference at the staff level one way or the other.
Okay. Madam Chair, follow up.
Yes, sir.
So the reason I ask that question is because I think there's, from my perspective, the state is, in this proposal anyway, 10% could dedicate up to $5 million of taxpayer money for an initiative that, by current example, demonstrates it's operating in the red. without the help of a locality. And so I think having a private-public partnership requires someone, the private entity, to evaluate whether or not the use of that money is wise, and whether and evaluate the likelihood of losing the money. And so while I don't have anything against local governments, but in this situation, we're giving taxpayer money to a situation where, unless the local government is willing to, I mean, they're not necessarily matching money on this. They're not putting money into it. And I really believe that whatever entity gets the grant should have some skin in the game. And so a couple of thoughts on my part. The first is, do we want to require the locality to join in this? In other words, is it a public partnership? In other words, the authority and the public body. Do we want to require the public body to commit a certain amount of money to the project, a match, 66%, some number, and I guess the third point I'd make is really perhaps a question I would pose. I'm not familiar with the grant evaluation process, and so when the application comes in, what are the metrics that they use to evaluate the propriety of the application? In other words, do they have to provide a pro forma? And if there is a pro forma, what does that have to look like? In other words, I'm told that in these unserved areas, the take rate may be 40%. So do we require the authority to perform a survey? Now, we can't hold the people responding to the survey, can't hold their feet to the fire, but if we require them to do a survey and only 20% of the people say they're going to take it, well, then we know up front that there could be some greater financial challenges to that endeavor. And then the third, I don't know whether we require this in the private-public partnership, but what do we get after the fact to determine, to evaluate? In other words, is there a requirement that they provide financial statements and audited books to let us see how it's going?
Madam Chair, if I may, Doug Leftwich, there was a lot there, so I'm gonna try to catch everything.
Sorry.
And if I miss something, please let me know. To start off with a clarification, this $50 million round, applications are to submit an application is a significant undertaking. It takes weeks or months of engineering and effort, as well as no small expenditure on the part of either the local government or the ISP partner, or both. And so this $50 million round is nearing announcement. In the next few weeks, we'll be announcing winners. So any changes we'd be considering would be for next year, the budget for which is currently $35 million. Obviously, we're going to have a set of budget amendments, and so we'll see where we land there. But the 10% would be 3.5, just to get everybody on the same page there. Currently, the VADI program requires that there be at least a 20% match. The Commonwealth won't pick up in excess of 80% of the cost of a project. I don't foresee that changing, even if we open the number of folks who are eligible to apply to a greater universe of people. So there'd still need to be, either from the authority or the locality, at least 20%. And then turning to what we use to evaluate, the core metric, the most important single metric, is the state cost per passing, which is to say, how efficiently are we using state dollars to get people online? By and large, applications that ask the state to pick up 80% of the cost of a build have not been above the funding line, which is to say that once we score them, it's very, very, very rare that somebody who isn't providing significant skin in the game winds up getting their project funded. We also look at what the speed is, what the cost is, what the numbers of community anchor institutions or other significant community assets. Are we getting a fire station online? Are we getting a library online? Those are things that we take seriously and will give a score bump to a project for. But the core metric is always that state cost per pass, and so that is the manner in which things are evaluated on the front end. We do not ask for pro formas. In general, we do require that you have at least 2 years of operation and submission to the FCC, what they call your Form 477, which is to say you've been in operation, you've been submitting your forms, you're serving people, or in the absence of 2 years of operations, we do ask for evidence of adequate financial wherewithal to carry out the project. That can take a number of different forms. That I think is, would be unlikely to change. We want to make sure that an authority had the ability to actually do what they were promising they could do. I believe there was one. I apologize, Dolly. I think there was one other question. Oh, the follow-up. We routinely, in the course of grant management, are working with grant applicants as they request reimbursement to ensure that they're doing what they said they were doing. They report their number of connections, their expenditures, etc. If you've got more specific details, I strongly suspect Dr. Tamara Holmes, who's the director of the Office of Broadband at DHCD, is here with us and can give you a much more detailed look at how DHCD grant staff follow up individually with grantees who've been awarded.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. I see a raised hand. Mike Culp has his hand raised. And did you have a question or a comment or a response, Mike?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just following up on Delegate Leftwich's comments. One of the things that I've noticed about the proposal is there's the potential that a locality could be the authority's partner. So minor change to the application process, but it's bringing in the authority who is acting as an ISP. Remember, an authority can provide service to customers. So in that case, they just come in as the ISP in a partnership with a locality. For the Albemarle Broadband Authority, we do not act as an ISP, but we would not back away from partnering with another authority if it were a value that came in. So if Orange County Broadband Authority wanted to build fiber across county lines and serve Albemarle County residents, VADI could see an application from the Albemarle Broadband Authority with the Orange County Broadband Authority as the private sector, not really a private sector, but as the partner that's providing the services. So I wonder if that's an opportunity that we may look at as kind of the combination of B and C, but more focused on B with a slight change that allows the authority to come in as the ISP. And I'll be quiet. Thank you.
Thank you. Other members of the Broadband Advisory Council who have questions or comments, further discussion on this as we're considering it.
Yep. Madam Chair, this is Steve Sandy.
Thank you, Mr. Sandy. Go ahead.
Yeah, question for Evan, or maybe just clarification is for the group is I think we're still referring to any of these broadband authorities would have to be a last mile provider. So I don't think we're considering middle mile. That's just a clarification if Evan could touch on that. And I still think the criteria is unserved areas that would have to be met. So just wanted to clarify those and make sure I understood that correctly.
Yeah, Steve, we're not contemplating this question, contemplating any other changes to the program. And so, a pure middle mile project would have no passings. So its state cost per pass would be, an impossible division question, but it would get no points in that space in any event, and it wouldn't be competitive. The question of whether or not an authority that was working with a private ISP, they can currently apply. So no change would be needed for that. But it's really the question of where an authority is acting as an ISP, as you stated. That's sort of the crux of the matter.
Great. Senator Lewis, you have your hand up.
Yes, Madam Chair. A quick question for Evan. And this may have, if this was addressed, I was called away for just a few minutes when the discussion started. So if this has been addressed, just let me know. But as to option C, what was the thinking, and is there any magic behind that 10% figure?
It was addressed. I'm happy to address it again, Senator.
No,
there's no magic to that 10% figure. We settled on 10% because it is a modest figure that would still permit, a couple of realistic projects, but it is not. There's no deeper thinking behind that, and you would not hear significant staff objection if you wanted to tinker with that percent.
And just, Madam Chair, just a little bit of a follow-up to that. So do you think, Evan, there would be some value from a pilot standpoint into making it a little more robust so you get a better feel for how this would work?
It's hard to say, Senator. I mean, one of the things that we would learn through conducting either a pilot or opening it up generally is just how much appetite among localities there is to undertake these projects in the absence of a private sector partner. I flat out don't know the answer to that. We know that there are, and one resides in your district, a handful of authorities that are acting as last mile ISPs. I don't know if more would enter the space if there were funding available to support them in doing so. There may be a great number that would, there may be very few that would. That we just don't know the answer to.
Thank you.
Thank you. Paul Krizak, Delegate Krizak.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair. Evan, I have a quick question for you. So you said that there would be a match if we went with, let's say, C or, well, I guess C perhaps. The public partnership that they would still have, as Delegate Leftwich aptly puts it, skin in the game. Then they would still have to put the 20% in, because one of the concerns I've had is, and one of the reasons I like the VATI program with the private-public partnership is that when we talk about 55 million, we're really talking about, the other 20+%. As you said, some of these, there's a lot more than 20% that's actually in there from the private side. So you're really talking, I'm not very good at math, that's why I'm a delegate, but it's a lot more money, right? So, yeah.
Yes, Delegate. The joke in law school used to be, we went to law school, not math school, when they'd let us use calculators on relatively elementary contract questions. But we bring in significant match in the VATI program. The current round, it was in excess of 100 million in proposed match, alongside that 105 million in requested funding. I apologize, I don't remember the specific number. Additionally, as we said, the minimum requirement is that you bring 20% match to the table. But because it's a competitive program, your chances of getting across the finish line with that 20% match are somewhat slim. In general, people are doing, 40 to more percent match. And, really, if you want to be sure you're going to score well, have an affordable project and then bring a bunch of non-state money to the table. So if we opened it up to units of local government, we would just ask that they bring match to the table that was not state money.
Hey, Evan, it's Tara. I was just going to share the last round. It was actually a 1-for-1. So there were $105 million in requests, and the match that was submitted was 105 million exactly. So it was a 1-for-1. And on average, we're looking at a 35% match. If you take each of our rounds and you look at the most recent round, it's about 35%.
And Tamara, that's on applications. Can you speak more specifically than we just have about awarded applications, what the average match is?
Yeah. last round of VATI, it was higher than the 35% average of the total pool. It was almost like between 50 and 55%, because some of our highest scoring projects, they were only requesting maybe 30% of the project cost, and the provider and the locality either jointly or separately covered the other costs. So the highest scoring one, the last round, actually provided a 60% match.
Thank you, Mary.
Thank you. So let's see, Jimmy Carr, looks like you've got your hand up.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. So I guess I asked at the end of the last meeting if DHCD could get their hands on some of the more recent financial statements and of some of the authorities that have been formed in Virginia and have been around for a longer time. And I appreciate that both the Wired Road and the RVBA provided their most recent financial statements. I don't know whether other members had the opportunity to do so, but I spent some time digging around in them, and they basically confirm what we already know, which is that this is a challenging problem and there's no simple solution. I've said before, and I guess I still do have some reservations about the authority model. It's been tried a lot over the years with a couple of successes, but some that probably more that have not been. But at the same time, I think it's important that we keep working on this problem and go after new and improved approaches to connect as many currently unserved Virginians as we can. My company operates in the New River Valley. I've seen what RVBA is doing, and certainly hope that they will succeed. And listening to what people have said, I think of the three options that have been laid out, and certainly I think that option C is a good framework for the next best step. A couple of questions have come up about some of the details in the language, some that I had, some that I hadn't thought of. Should the language be specific to authorities or to all local governments? Are we going to be clear that there's still a match requirement? It doesn't have to be a private match requirement, but is there this public match requirement? Is the focus still remaining on unserved? And most importantly, I think in this language, whatever language we recommend should be very clear in my mind that all VATI applications, whether it's one that comes from an authority or from a locality with a private sector partner, should be evaluated according to a consistent set of standards, and let's let the cream rise to the top. But I also think we got these options a couple of days before Thanksgiving. Those of you who are legislators, as I understand, had a pre-filing deadline sometime in the middle. I'm looking at what appears to be a robust overview of some deep topics in rural broadband that are still on our agenda this afternoon. And so I wonder, and it's also late on a Friday, maybe if we had a little time between now and, I guess we can't form a working group because we need to come back and act as a council, but maybe if we had a little more time for some council members who are so inclined to talk a little bit more and try and flesh out some of these details, it sounds to me like there would be consensus on some variation of option B or option C. And my recommendation would be that maybe we punt on this for a week or so and see if people who are particularly interested in some of these language questions can come up with something that represents a pretty broad consensus across all the stakeholders. It sounds like that's there, but there's a little bit of detail here that could be fleshed out. And so my proposal would be that we try and move on from this topic today, and people who are members of the council and interested try and talk with one another, take the three options that have been laid out in this memo and see if we can get more specific on a variation of option B or option C and bring it back to the council for a final discussion and approval.
Madam Chair, I think you might have muted yourself rather than unmute yourself.
Thank you. I did. Is there a discussion on this? Paul Krizek, you have your hand up.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. Jimmy Brace makes a interesting, provocative idea, I guess, in a sense, because we're already kind of getting in the weeds, and we don't even have actual language here. We just have very broad general choices. But I think we could maybe do I would offer a motion perhaps that we go ahead and we choose option C, but we convene a little kind of a little bit of what Jimmy's talking about. We convene a little work group to flush out the actual language, and maybe try to get it done in the next week or so, because we've got the General Assembly's coming up pretty quickly. We're all very limited on bills too, and so it is a crazy time. I don't even know who would actually carry this bill. But would that be? Is that something that I want to have you all? Is that something that sounds good? Because I think that the 10% is a question mark. We definitely need to have, as Delegate Leftwich mentioned, we need to have that reporting at annual reporting back to us and the financials. But as Evans mentioned, the process itself, make sure that you don't have that you will have a robust discussion of the capabilities of the applicants anyway. But I don't also like to mess with something that's only 5 years old, that's been working pretty well, the VATI program. And congratulations everybody on the 5-year anniversary of it. And may it go on until we've got everybody has broadband, and hopefully that's not another 5 years. So I throw that out there as we go ahead and we choose C with some tweaking of that we can possibly do.
So we have a motion on the floor to consider option C with some discussion and tweaking. I have Chris Hurst with a raised hand.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. Speaking to that.
And then Woodley behind him. Go ahead.
So I just, I don't really know if we really need a work group. I feel like the Broadband Advisory Council is a work group. And the more that we kind of subdivide that work means that we have less of a chance for us as a council to really debate this. I'm sorry that we're meeting on a Friday afternoon. Sorry, we got a lot of other stuff. But because we have not funded the VATI program in a meaningful way, again, $100 million plus in applications, and only now have we even been able to try and achieve half of that, $1 million a couple of years ago. I mean, it's almost insulting to think that that's actually a meaningful drop in the bucket to try and actually get broadband internet to every person in Virginia. In order to do that, we need to make sure that we have the funds available clearly because of the cost. The question that we're having here is really simple. It's about competition. The cap may be arbitrary if we go with a pilot project, but it's also funds not to exceed 10%. If we think of what the average cost for a project could be, and we think about what 10% of 50 million could be, and the fact that there's really only 4 broadband authorities throughout the Commonwealth that Evan thinks could even theoretically have an application that would be meritorious, why not go ahead and just let them apply? Because I really don't feel like, even in the first year, given all of the challenges that we've seen and articulated by authorities, and the way that Evan and Dr. Holmes just described how they're scored, that it's probably going to be difficult for them to compete, but we should probably let it happen because the competition, I think, is a good thing. I personally don't have any problem with going ahead, and remember, this doesn't have to be a bill. This could be budget language, just like it was budget language that brought this question before us. I say go ahead and just let it open. Let the folks have it that are broadband authorities that try to compete. I think they'll find that it's very stiff competition based off of what the private providers are able to offer in their proposals. But go ahead and let them compete. I really just don't see the harm, especially considering that we should, in this environment, in this particular part of broadband internet, be able to say that more competition is a good thing. That being said, I'm not going to try and make a substitute motion, but I really do think that we don't need a work group. If we want to go with the pilot program, I think 10% is fine. But that I ultimately think that we should just go ahead and go with option B. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Is there other discussion from the committee before we take a vote?
Well,
Lynn,
Madam Chair, one item of note, or
Yes.
two rather. The first is just as a reminder, this being a public body, if more than 2 members of the public body get together to discuss its business, that'll be a public meeting. And so we'll need to, if there were to be a work group, we'd need to publicly notice it. We need to do it like this. The second is that there is I feel like we're doing a good job offering kind of split the baby options. A thing that we can certainly do at the staff level that is not violative of the open meeting laws is circulate to the whole body language, take in individually rather than have don't reply all, right? But we can take in at the staff level individually your edits, process them, put them back out to the group, and get something that's effective. The one other thing I would say is one of VADI's strengths has been its responsiveness to the stakeholder community throughout that the creation of the VADI guidelines, and that has been doable because there's been only very broad boundaries set on the program at the legislative level. And then we've let the stakeholder community and the staff hash out how to best implement that. And I think both our local partners and our private partners would agree that process works right now. So I wouldn't want to put a ton of new specific requirements for this amount of match or that amount of this of what have you into the code if we could avoid it.
thank you. So it looks like we have a few more people. I understand that Linwood Lewis, Paul Krizak, Mike Culp, and Ray Lemura all want to speak. So Linwood Lewis, you're next, followed by Paul, followed by Mike, followed by Ray.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Just really briefly, and I think Delegate Krizak mentioned this in his sort of semi-motion about fleshing out the language and some of these concepts, which I think I support. I think that is a good idea. However, we do it within the confines of public meeting requirements or whether staff circulates drafts. But again, I just wanted to make sure, and I think he indicated that in his motion, that the 10% is part of that, because I really do think that needs to be bumped up just a little bit and made a little more robust in order to get something really out of this as a pilot. So that's it. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Mm-hmm. Paul Krizak, did you have another comment?
Well, I just want to, and then that's one of the reasons why I think we need to go through this process. And Evan mentions makes valid point. I was concerned about the open meeting issue, but if we don't have too many, if we just circulate that, I think we can do it. But yeah, that's 10% would be a part of the discussion, certainly.
Okay, Mike Culp.
Back to Delegate Hurst's comments. I think I made myself a little unclear. It is required that if a broadband authority comes in, they have to have a locality partner. That way you're verifying that the locality who may or may not be supporting that authority is aware of the risks that's taking. So it's similar to that. They're competing on the same level. We're just allowing the authorities to come in as if they're acting as a private sector partner, and they compete. I think that's where we may be headed, maybe not, but thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Yes, Ray Lemura.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I would like to echo some of the comments that Evan was making, really not to go overboard with too much tweaking to the guidelines. This is an extensive work that goes on with all of those who are interested in VADI, and I do want to give a lot of praise to the folks at DHCD and Evan's team for how careful they are in how the guidelines are crafted. And I think the rifle shot as we consider the municipal entrance into the VADI as a participant, and I don't view them as a competitor, but a participant into the program, is important. And I would have to slightly really object to increasing it more than 10%. We've heard it's oversubscribed already, and the dollar for dollar investments being made by the private sector to complement this would be mitigated
through any more percentage-wise in that capacity. The focus to the unserved is critical that we all are working to get to achieve. And I appreciate the work of everyone here today and the work of the council to, again, look at all options.
Thank you. Jay Left.
If I may, Madam Chair, before Delegate Leftwich, I apologize, Delegate. One thing to be clear about, we would regard the 10% as a no more than for the purposes of making awards, but everybody'd still be in the same mix. And so, you know, it may be that it would happen naturally that the applicant authorities might not succeed in their applications, and thus we wouldn't approach that. Or it may be that the cap would artificially push some of them below the funding line, but we wouldn't be setting aside a separate pot just for authorities to apply, to be clear.
Thanks for that clarification. Jay Leftwich, did you have another? Delegate Leftwich?
Yeah, well, Madam Chair, I'm going to interpret Delegate Krizik's last comments as an amended motion to delve in this a little further by having the members provide comments to Evan and his team, and I'm going to second that.
Okay. Thank you. So we have a motion and a second. Any further discussion about it?
Madam Chair, just could you clarify the motion, please?
My understanding of the motion would be that we approve with to discuss move to discuss item C, which would recommend that we would create a pilot program with the caveat that the committee will be looking at it together over the week to make sure that we're all in agreement. Is that, if somebody else would like to clarify, Delegate Krizak, perhaps?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, it's just that the Broadband Advisory Council recommends that we pursue option C, and that over the next week through emails we hash out exactly what the specifics are, what's involved there, but not going, you know, just what we've discussed today. I don't think there's anything that's outside of this, what we've discussed today, that needs to be included in that. But it's really the question about, well, I'm not even going to go through it. We've already discussed it. So that's the whole point of this. Otherwise, we could do it now in the next hour. So that's the motion. Jay, thank you for seconding.
All righty. So we have a motion and a second, pursuing option C, discussing and refining it for final passage. Would we entertain, I want to just get some clarification. Somebody, would that mean that we have to meet again next week to do the final vote? Or is this considered the vote and we will be sending, it seems to me that.
Madam Chair, this is
Yes.
Eric Johnson, DHCD Director. Thank you everyone for the good, robust discussion. That's the question I had too, Madam Chair, is that we as a staff at the agency can get out, and there's in your packet right after the minutes for the public, there's that option C standard language, and so we could send that out to everyone. I do know from these kind of processes in the past, there will be different opinions. So in terms of final language, if you want to get a final language, the will of the full body, I do believe we'd have to come back at some point to ratify that. That's just my take, but I wanted to clarify that we can help get it in the best shape as possible to come back, and just like you would with the General Assembly Committee, you could modify it at the next board meeting. But that's what I wanted to throw.
Yeah, thank you, Eric. Thank you very much, Eric. It appears that the concerns that we have that we're not all on board with, or that there are challenges, is the amount of the wards exceeding whether it's 10% or 15%. And can someone else identify what other things they are not comfortable with that we need to discuss or further explore? Because I'm not clear about what that is. And it would be great, I think, personally, if we could get this resolved while we're here together.
Madam Chair, since it's my motion, so I think we should start with Jimmy Carr, because he was kind of the instigator of this whole thing, but not to throw him under the bus, but he had some good points, and that's why I made the motion when I did. We had some other, I mean, some of the issues that Delegate Leftwich had and some of us had, I think we've already addressed.
Yeah.
For example, in the you know, in the reporting back to us, and in the financials and things like that. So you're right. Maybe after all this discussion, it's really just down to if we all decide we want to go with C, and it's just a question of the 10% issue. And I think Evan has made it clear that probably, I mean, it's unlikely to go over that threshold anyway. But I think that the concern with taking the threshold out, not having a number, I mean, I guess if I want to withdraw my motion and we want to try to finish this out now, if that's really the concern, because there's no real other issues, if you will. If Jimmy doesn't have any concerns there, then maybe we can have a little bit more discussion. I know Evan said there was no magic reason to 10%, but maybe a little bit more discussion about that, why that's the number that you guys have come up with, and does it make sense to not have it, or to make it 5% or 15 or something else? Or otherwise, I think we've got to go with the motion that I've presented, and vote on that.
Okay, thank you. I have Jimmy Carr has raised his hand.
So I raised it earlier. I mean, some of the issues that came up that at least I have an opinion on, and Delegate Leftwich spoke about some of these. The first is I would suggest that the language should be specific to broadband authorities, because they, Evan mentioned earlier, Vadi's got a requirement that you've been in business for a certain period of time. And so I think those authorities which have been stood up and would have been doing those for a little while, I think we would limit this to broadband authorities. At least that would be my suggestion, because that's how this came up. And I would, maybe others don't think it's necessary. I would like some language in there just to make sure, unless people don't think it's necessary, that we're still focusing on the unserved.
Mm-hmm. It says that.
Okay, and with that, we're crystal clear that there has to be a match. Doesn't have to be private sector, but whatever the leverage requirement is, any applicant for this program has to have the same minimum match.
Madam Chair.
Who's asking to speak now?
Eric Johnson, DHC.
Eric, I'm sorry. Eric, go ahead, please.
For Mr. Carr, I just did want to clarify two things on the item C language in the packet. It still contains the unserved and the match. So my read of the state code is we would still have to treat the application the same, just to clarify.
Thank you. Roz Tyler, do you have a question?
Yes, I'm here, Senator Bosco.
Okay.
I just wanted to make a comment, because whether we're talking about the percentage amount or whether it's 10% or 20%, is that we want to get something that's going to be workable in committee as we submit it to appropriations, because we don't want to have to try to go through and make a lot of changes as we go forward with the process, because we don't want the piece of legislation to die. And so we need to get something that's going to be workable at this time.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. My understanding of what we're talking about is just changing, and everybody should have that language. Could you put that, Eric or Evan, could you put the language exactly of what option C is, so that everybody can look at it publicly, so that we're all on the same page? Because it says underserved, it says unserved. The only change it really is saying we would allow a pilot program for broadband authorities. if I recall the language appropriately.
Yes, Madam Chair. Chandler, are you working on putting that back up?
Yes. Are we talking about the PowerPoint, Senator
Mm-hmm.
Boysko? Okay.
I think the budget language actually in the package, the packet.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
Give me a minute. I'm getting there.
And so everyone is clear. I think the other considerations are good and important, but I think the wise thing to do is address the single question of applicant eligibility before us and assume that all other requirements of the program would just stay the same. So you'd still have to have a match. You'd still have to, prove to staff that you can do what you've said you can do. You'd still need to serve unserved premises, et cetera.
Yeah. And I think this issue is so, I'm just going to make a comment here. I think that the issue is so broad and large and important to so many people that it gets confusing. And so I think the clearer we can be and make sure that everybody can see the same language together so that the public knows what we're doing and our colleagues know what we're doing so that there is no question, I think that would be best. Chandler, do you have the language up there yet? Do you have access to that? And I am.
Madam Chair, it would have that would have helped facilitate this whole
Yeah, we should have had that up there the whole time.
Because that's what I've been looking at. Yeah, because in this section, if you pull it up a little bit higher, there is no language in that currently that has any kind of that has anything about the financial reporting and that's why Evan kind of explained that that's not really necessary because it happens organically through the process, but it isn't in the language, nor is it in the new language.
Evan, would you like to respond? Evan or Eric, would you like to respond to that just to help give some clarity?
Sure. The currently most of the specific requirements for application and the scoring metrics are assembled not through legislative compromise, but through that stakeholder process. And so, as I said, I think almost everybody and maybe even everybody really agrees that's a pretty good consensus-based process. And so I just wouldn't want to put a ton of new stuff in here. So I think the approach should be, here's the budget language, and this is actually taking from the language of the budget that was just agreed upon and amending it. This notwithstanding language down here. So notwithstanding item 114, et cetera, the department shall establish a 1-year pilot in the second year in which local governments may apply directly for body funds without investment by the private sector or requirement of private ownership or operation. The department shall not make awards under the pilot program exceeding 10% of total funds appropriated in the second year to the Virginia Telecommunication Initiative. So that's that would be what we would be recommending if y'all went with it to the money committees, and then the rest of the specifics. And we welcome, by the way, these are great stakeholder meetings. The first time we had one in person a couple years ago, we had to get in a bigger room and bring in extra chairs. So there really is a lot of interest and a lot of productive feedback. And I think members of the committee could certainly join those as well as we construct the body guidelines.
Thank you. So I don't know if people who still have hands up really want to talk, or I have Ray Lemura, Jimmy Carr, Chris Hurst, Jay Leftwich on the list of members who still wish to speak. Ray, would you? Nope. Jimmy?
Yes, Madam Chair. So my first question is in the first sentence there, the second highlighted line. I would propose that we strike local governments and insert whatever the proper legal name is for one of these broadband authorities.
Thank you. And is there, Steve, you just sent a note asking the same question. Would you consider that to be a motion to amend the language?
Sure, if that's the format we're in, I would move we strike the local governments and insert broadband authorities, unless someone knows there's a different term of art used in the code. I don't know if Evan knows that, or.
I think we could say a unit of local government, which would be the reality is different parts of the code require. I don't believe there's a local government. It still need to be somebody who is legally permitted to do this. And so I think the rest of the code may have already handled that for us, since there are a lot of hurdles between a local government as a local government offering broadband service directly. So there's really only, of units of local government, there's only authorities that can do it. So if somebody else applied, I think they'd be very challenged. But we could certainly just say authorities subject to. I don't want to remove discretion from the body, but I think staff is capable of taking that direction and inserting the term you're looking for, subject to sort of advice of counsel, and circulating it.
So
fair enough. But I'm trying to be a little more specific in what we're talking about, because that's how the question came up.
Madam Chair, this is Eric.
Go ahead, Eric.
I think I just wanted to concur, and I think hopefully alleviate Mr. Carr's concerns with what Evan just said. In essence, what we're seeing with this language, given that the existing language is in the guidelines, the local government would still be applying, and that would be the grant. We would be granting to local government, but then the provider would be a broadband authority, and that in the code they have to do that, right? So they can as local government right now. So that. Tell me if I'm wrong on that, Evan, but I think that's why we didn't specify there. But the ISP on the public side would need to be an authority or a legally able body in Virginia's public in their code to be a provider of broadband.
Okay. So did anybody want to further push that?
Well, I'm just trying to get this right. I see how you're phrased it now, but then this just says the local government can apply directly, and it doesn't say anything about who the partner operator is.
Okay, thank you.
We could include language, Madam Chair, if I may, that simply says the department shall establish a one-year pilot in which local governments may apply directly for body funds without investment by the private sector or requirement of private ownership or operation, or a private operator, and leave it there. Or we could say and must have a local government authority as their partner. I think either of those could work. There's a lot of different ways to do it.
We've got a group of authorities that were set up to do this. Some of them have been around for a while. They have some subject matter expertise. I thought that everyone was talking about expanding eligibility for this program to that group. And so I'm just trying to, what you just said, Evan, with something at the end, without private, I would say with private ownership, with a private partner or with a broadband authority partner, and trust, as you said earlier, that you come up with whatever the right term is in the code and use it.
Thank you for that. I'm wondering if Dr. Tamara Holmes has any input into this, since she's the person who really delves into the applications and going through them, if it's necessary for us to go into this kind of detail, or is that something that they are already? Dr. Holmes, are you on the call still?
Yes, I'm here. I think we can, as a staff, I think it was stated earlier, the staff can take the proposed language, even what Chandler is sharing right now, and tweak it to what we need it to be and share that with you all. Because I think either way, whether you leave it with local governments or we change it to public broadband authorities, I think you're still meeting the intent. Municipal local government will probably be the best, but we as Evan said earlier, and Eric, we kind of delve way deeper during the guideline development process. So I think it's really just the wording right now, and we could just put units of local government because public broadband authorities are units of local government. We would still have the local governments be a partner as part of the application process because the public broadband authority would be the last mile provider. So I think it just really depends on what your preference is, to be honest with you.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Madam Chair?
Yes, Mr. Johnston.
Just one thing that may help with this as well is that, at the end of the day, the House and Senate Money Committee staff will also be really helpful to kind of wordsmith all this if we have the intent. So, if we know the intent, the motion could be that, and then let the experts in legislative services craft that piece of it.
Thank you, Eric. I think that is an excellent observation, and I greatly appreciate that. Chris Hurst, and let's see, Jay Leftwich and or Chris Hurst, any other questions? Your hands are up. Jay Leftwich?
Yeah, okay, so if we're going to make a recommendation to the money committees, I think we should try to be, we won't have to have every word worked out, but I think we should try to be fairly specific. But then I have another concern, which kind of runs concurrent with this, and that is we spend, or the option C spends about 10, 15 lines talking about what a private public partnership has to look like. And it talks about an investment of money by a third party. And then we say with one sentence, notwithstanding any of that, local government can apply. And in the way I tend to try to draft, if I'm specific to one party, then I'm not similarly specific to the other party, then the interpretation is going to be, well, you didn't mean for that to apply to the other party because you were specific here, but you weren't specific there, and you totally exempted them in this paragraph. So I think we need to say something to the effect that the provisions of little I through little v apply except for the requirement of having a private partner. Does that make sense? I mean, and again, the money committees can deal with that, but I mean, and I don't know whether this will ever be litigated, but if I were a local government and I were denied an application because I didn't put money in, I would argue I'm not required to because that's not what it says. Just my take.
Thank you. Paul Krazak, Delegate Krazak.
Okay, so since we haven't voted on the motion, I'm going to withdraw it with Jay's permission, and we just make a new motion that we go ahead and we pick option C, and we make it clear. I think that Delegate Leftwich has changed just that little bit of that little I through little v would apply. We just wordsmith it a little bit. Let staff do that and make the decision on the 10% right now. I would just say that we go with the 10%, and let's have a vote on that.
Is there a second?
I'll second that. Steve Sandy.
Okay, thank you. Chris Hurst, you have your hands up. I'm hoping we are moving towards.
Yeah, I'm sorry, Madam Chair. It could be a lot easier if we just went with option B. We could have saved a lot of time. Again, I'm looking at the awards that we awarded at the beginning of the calendar year, and there are some awards that already exceed that we do per proposal that would exceed 10%. So what we're essentially saying is, and I personally believe that the four authorities are going to face stiff competition, but with this 10% cap, we're essentially saying that if one award happens to be more than $3.5 million, one application, and it's really, really good, and Dr. Holmes and everybody else says it's meritorious, we're essentially saying that no, we've decided to take a policy decision and say that no, you can't do that because we have this artificial number that has already been explained as kind of a random number that was picked. Let's get rid of the number. Let's open up the competition. If the current private-public partnerships feel threatened by this, then that's because competition is a good thing to be able to deliver. We have not changed the word unserved, underserved. That's different from where we are now. It has to be unserved. So let's make sure we have as many people as possible competing for that to help get the 500,000 people without internet. But if we want to go with 10%, we can go with 10%. I just worry that there might be some really good proposals that get turned down because the award amount potential is going to be more than that 10%. That being said, I'll vote for the motion because at least it's an incremental step forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So we have a motion and a second to approve option C. I think we're ready for a vote.
Okay, I'll go down the roll then for a roll call. Delegate Hurst.
Aye.
Delegate Leftwich.
Aye.
Delegate Krizik.
Aye.
Delegate Tyler.
Aye.
Senator Hashmi. Senator Hashmi.
Aye.
Senator Boysko.
Aye.
Senator Lewis.
Aye.
Mr. Call.
So just to be clear, are we approving motion C, or are we doing what the delegate said? I thought it was a option C with some tweaking, or is it just straight up option C?
It's straight up option C.
Okay, aye.
Christy Proctor.
Aye.
Mike Kaiser.
I actually agree with Delegate Hurst, so I vote no. I'm in favor of option B.
Ray Lemura.
Aye.
Steve Sandy.
Aye.
Mike Culp.
Aye.
Richard Schulman.
Aye.
Secretary Ring.
Aye.
And Evan Feynman for Secretary Ball.
Aye.
Okay, the ayes have it with one member voting no, Madam Chair.
Okay, thank you very much. Appreciate the robust conversation on this. The next item on our agenda is likely considered 2021 session bills. And Evan Feynman is going to take us through that, give us a little bit of background and perspective on what we might expect.
Sure. Thank you, Madam Chair. And to be clear, I recognize now that possible legislative initiatives might have led people to the belief that we were going to suggest legislation here. That was not our intent. Rather, what we were hoping to do was really quickly give members of the council an overview of topics that have very frequently come up in previous legislative sessions, and many of which are likely to come up in the current legislative session. So I'm going to, recognizing that we've already had a fairly exhaustive discussion today, I'm going to try to run through these very swiftly, and then we can talk about questions as we get to them. First, rail crossings. Owners of infrastructure that cross big portions of territory frequently see that infrastructure overlap. That's true when power lines intersect with highways. That's true with water and sewer lines that intersect with a buried broadband cable. And that is true when telecommunications facilities intersect rail crossings. Multiple times over the last decade, there have been reported issues with costs of getting broadband connections across rail crossings, and those have led to either work groups or potential legislation or activity on the part of the railroad operators to try to solve that problem. It has come up a couple of times. We do not know it to be an active issue right now. But that does not mean, given that it's a fairly popular piece of legislation, that some version of it won't be introduced again. Most recently, a bill was introduced that just flat out attempted to limit the cost. That was objected to fairly strenuously and wound up being withdrawn. But it's a hot topic and one that is likely to come up. We do know that particularly our smaller ISPs have gotten quotes for the cost of crossing rail crossings that were very high and basically precluded them serving communities that were on the other side of the railroad tracks in the past. So it is an issue that has been a challenge for broadband deployment from time to time. I can't tell you that I know how systemic that problem is. Anecdote is not data. And so we know that there are episodic instances when it's been a problem. I don't know the extent to which it's a systemic problem across Virginia, but it's been an item of legislative debate before and probably will be again. Moving on to municipal broadband, that was more to, we just spent a lot of time talking about municipal broadband. I don't want to do a ton more, but a related item to this item, to the item we just discussed, is the question of obstacles in the code to localities providing broadband as the locality rather than creating an authority. That has come up frequently. There was a bill on this topic last session, and there has been, I think, for the last several sessions. It is likely to come up again. Currently, the code says, in effect, there's a fairly lengthy list of restrictions and requirements that a locality must adhere to if the locality, as the locality, is going to offer broadband service. They can instead form an authority under the Wireless Services Authorities Act and avoid the bulk of those hurdles. There are still some issues that can cause difficulty for a local government from doing it. There are advocates on one side of the issue that will argue that we could be doing a ton more provision of service if we opened up, removed restrictions from municipal provision of broadband service. There are advocates on the other side who would argue that this could open up a Pandora's box of a ton of public spending that doesn't lead to a ton more connectivity. My view is that, in fact, it would be a relatively low impact issue, whether it stayed the same or whether it changed. When we talk about provision of infrastructure to unserved folks, all of the challenges that have prevented the private sector from getting there would exist, or many of those challenges would exist for public sector providers, particularly if it's individual local governments. That said, the governor's office doesn't really have a position on this. I will tell you that the broadband team can get it done one way, or can get universal coverage one way or the other. We can make it work either way. On broadband affordability, this is an area where municipal provision of broadband could be a better tool. Remember, there are two sides to the coin of the digital divide. It's a bad metaphor. Two cliffs composing the digital divide. One is infrastructure access. That's the question of whether or not there's a fiber or a wireless signal coming to your home or business adequate to get you online at broadband speeds. The other side is, okay, you've got a fiber coming to your home or building, or you've got a wireless signal, but your household may not have the financial wherewithal to actually pay for service. That affordability problem is significant. It is not one that Virginia, or being frank, any state, has a particularly good approach to solving. I'm optimistic that there may be either an administration bill or a bill that the administration supports that would dip our toes into the water of addressing affordability. That's not a decision that's been made. We don't know. We don't have the full list of what legislation the governor will be advancing. But that is a topic that is significant. Frankly, the only reason we've been able to do a pretty good job, though not a great job, of virtual schools during this crisis has been a tremendous injection of federal dollars that have helped pay for service for low-income folks, as well as pay for connectivity devices for low-income folks. In the absence of that, it'd be a problem. So the affordability problem remains out there. It remains significant. It's something that we're going to need to address if we're going to claim to have truly bridged the digital divide now or sometime soon. Moving on, pole attachments. Most broadband infrastructure is not buried. Most of it is aerial, which is to say attached to utility poles. The last couple of years have been quiet on this front, but there used to be annual battles over pole attachment fees that were ferocious. The big issue is that different pole owners are regulated differently and can charge different amounts. And obviously, the more it costs to attach your equipment to a utility pole, the more expensive it is to deploy broadband. Related to pole attachments, there's also the question of just ability to use poles and the easements they sit on. There was just some legislation passed last session that affected some previously granted easements to give broadband deployers greater leeway to use those easements. That's currently being litigated. There's some question as to the legality of that. I think that's great. You know, the policymakers are the players on the field and the courts are the ump, and they're going to make a call. But, you know, that question of what people are allowed to charge and to what extent they continue charging it is an issue related to pole attachment fees. This question of unserved and underserved, the unserved in our current understanding is somebody who doesn't have a connection at broadband speeds. We have worked pretty hard to kind of banish the word underserved from our policymaking. It may shed a little light, but provides very little heat. The reason for our doing away with the concept of underserved is that it in practice winds up not being all that useful a distinction. Finding out that somebody has DSL rather than dial-up doesn't really matter for our purposes. DSL is also inadequate. The degree to which somebody's connection is inadequate, as policymakers, I don't think should really interest us. I certainly am for analysts and data collectors figuring out, you know, the different gradations of unserved. But we've worked really hard to say, if you've got a connection that is at or above what we all call broadband speed, then you're served. If you're below that, you're unserved. And, you know, that's the way we've proceeded moving forward. It will inject complexity that I don't think, now, you know, policymakers can disagree, but that I don't think will significantly improve policy outcomes to return to a three-tiered system where we're recognizing in the code served, underserved, and unserved folks. So that's been the position we've taken on the broadband team throughout. And just as people are considering legislation this session, please take that into account. Finally, mapping. This is a complicated one. I'm going to try to go really quickly. Federal reporting is deeply flawed. There is not currently a
I don't know if there is anything.
good federal map. There is also not a good state map, and there may never be. In fact, the broadband team has come up with a strategy by which we're going to be able to get to universal coverage without needing a broadband coverage map. That strategy is to let our local partners know that they should, anywhere they're not sure, anywhere they think might be covered but they're not sure is covered, go ahead and apply for VADI to fund that area, and then let existing ISPs utilize the challenge process to pull their served areas out of proposed project areas. That way, what we can do is say, okay, we know there's Comcast up in Northeast blank county. We'll just come up, you know, a little past the line, and then when the challenge exists, or you let Comcast know and you say, hey, we're coming up here. How far do we go? That's how we're going to be able to create projects that will serve everybody without creating that map. An alternate strategy would be, and this is something that is probably a couple years out at the federal level, has not been pursued in any state but Georgia, but has been successful in Georgia, would be a state level requirement that internet service providers provide their network details to the Commonwealth, and the Commonwealth could publish a served unserved map. They would still keep secret ISPs, specific ISPs, network areas, but would just say, putting all these different ISP maps together. Here's where it's served, here's where it's unserved. The problem with federal reporting, to just go really quickly, right now under Form 477, which is the manner in which ISPs report their coverage to the feds, if you've got a single service address in an entire census block, you report that census block served. That obviously creates big challenges when population density declines and those census blocks get very large. What that means is if somebody shows you a coverage map, they're knowingly or unknowingly, they're misleading you. The maps are just not accurate. You just always got to keep that in mind. I think the best example of that is not a broadband example, but the cellular example. Everybody here travels around the Commonwealth with some regularity. Our friends and partners in the mobile universe report in a way that complies with federal rules that every square inch of the Commonwealth is covered with 4 bars of 4G LTE or 4G LTE coverage. That's laughably not the case. Those are the items that perennially pop up. And so I tried to give a really quick overview of those so that folks had kind of a grounding if you haven't been in and out of these battles. Happy to take questions on those, or we can move on.
Thanks. Are there any questions from members of the committee?
Chair, real quick.
Yes. Go get ahead.
Hey, thank you, Madam Chair. Evan, you mentioned census blocks, and that just triggered in my brain really quickly the spectrum auction. Is there what are the implications for legislation eligibility as it relates to census blocks and RDOF?
So RDOF, which is the Rural Digital Opportunity Fund that the FCC is conducting right now, that's a reverse auction, and they're going to offer some funding to ISPs to serve those blocks. We have very little ability at the state level to affect that program. I've been pretty candid that I think that's a poorly designed program at the FCC. It was also rushed out ahead of early November for reasons that I think folks can intuit. That is going to be a challenge. It's going to be a challenge for us as state grant makers. It's going to be a challenge for ISPs. As I said, the VADI program shapes up very favorably when compared to federal previous FCC deployments of funds. It's more than 5 times more efficient on a per dollar basis. It's more than 6 times more efficient on a construction time basis. The RDOF does 2 things that are very different from what VADI does. First, it sets a minimum bid for specific geographies and then expects multiple ISPs to compete over those geographies. That's the inverse of what we do, which is allow geographies to compete against each other and score them on efficiency so that we're always taking the most efficient projects. The second thing that it does is it does not include public-private partnerships. RDOF and previous FCC programs put the ISP applicants in the driver's seat and literally forbid any leverage, whether it is local or state dollars from coming into those projects until after the auction has been completed. The final big problem with it is that while they call it a grant program, what they actually do is dribble out your award over a decade. So you're getting 1/10 of your award each year for 10 years, even though you've got to build as the winner. You got to build this thing and spend all your capital up front. That really restricts who can do it. It really restricts the utility of those grants. We know that there's going to be hundreds of millions of federal dollars that are going to be awarded to Virginia as a result of the forthcoming RDOF round. And while it will lead to more connections, candidly, best case scenario, it'll be a wash in terms of our ability to get to universal coverage. And it's somewhat likely to be actively harmful in our ability to get to universal coverage. That's unfortunate. We wish the federal programs were structured differently, but they are structured the way they are. We've sent them a number of letters, but I don't think we don't have too many other policy options in front of us, Delegate Hurst, to really affect the outcomes there.
Thank you. Mike Culp, you had a question? You had your hand raised?
Oh, thank you, Madam Chair. It's more of a comment, and thanks, Evan, for the update. Just written comments can be sent in. If they're written legislative priorities, we can send them in, and you have a copy of mine, so thank you for bearing the brunt. I appreciate it. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Uh-huh. Are there any other questions or comments from members of the committee? Hearing none, I want to thank you all for your time and attention in this very good conversation today. I think it was really important that everybody was able to share their concerns and get their questions answered. I hope that you all feel confident in where we're going with this and look forward to continuing our work together. And with so, I'm wondering if we have a motion to adjourn from anyone.
I move that we adjourn.
All righty.
Second.
All righty. Thank you all for your time, and I hope everybody has a happy holiday, and we will see you in the very near future. And thank you all for being here today. Have a great day.
Thank you.